Hello, everybody. So I got almost no sleep last night. It turns out there is such a thing as too much fun. My name is Robert Hansen. I go by RSnake. I'm a director of product management at White Hat Security. I used to run hackers.org, wrote a bunch of books and stuff. I've been working in computer security, web application security specifically, and I really hate saying these numbers because it makes me feel old, but like 18, 19 years now. So the bulk of my life now. Yeah, I feel like this is kind of an interesting opportunity for me to get in front of you guys and talk about something a little bit different. If you saw my talk at HUSecCon, I was taking down China. If you've seen other presentations I've done, taking down various routers and switches and all kinds of crazy things. Well, as a keynote, it's an interesting challenge because I get a chance to talk to you about sort of more the forward-thinking things or things that are I see us making mistakes in the industry. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about blindspots. My goal is to inspire you, not to take you down. I know it sort of sounds like I'm going to be saying, oh, there's bad things about us, so therefore this is a bad presentation or whatever. But really, I want you guys to walk away from this feeling empowered. Like there's an opportunity to fix some things that are wrong about our industry. I don't want you to take this too much to heart. Don't get really upset. And if the guy next to you says that he doesn't have any blind spots at all, you can feel free to ignore that person, because they do. We all have them. I have them. Everybody has them. But I want you to take an opportunity to be self-reflective. You don't necessarily have to tell anyone what your blind spots are if you feel uncomfortable with that. But it's good to embrace the things you don't know and think about how to improve your knowledge in those spaces. It makes us better as an entire industry. One of the most influential quotes to me personally over the years actually came from Dan Geer as Keynote of Source Boston. And it gives me a lot of comfort when I read this. Only people in this room will understand what I'm going to say. It is this: security is perhaps the most difficult intellectual profession on the planet. I think there's times that I think we can sort of feel very alone, like there's not really people who understand what we're trying to get across, understand the technology that we're working on, and I don't want you to feel that way. I think there's enough people, even in just this audience, that you can find a peer to bounce ideas off of, to get familiar with, to sort of fill the holes and the gaps in your knowledge, and possibly this is the first kind of wave of a new sort of beginning as an industry where we start thinking about our blind spots as sort of an advantage. They're a way to open up and talk to people about things we don't know. So there's 6 blind spots in total that I'm going to be talking about today that I see us as the web application security industry specifically, because of the name LastCon, things that I think that we tend to ignore or miss wholesale, that tend to be fairly large, fairly influential things that we get wrong. So let's start this off. I know this is probably a dangerous thing to do first thing in the morning because you guys are probably a little tired like I am, stayed a little late, drank a little bit too much wine. But I want you to do an experiment with me. Promise me, I'm not going to let anyone steal your wallet or whatever. I'm not going to steal your wallet. I know where your iPads are. And I'm not worried about it. But I want you to close your eyes and do a little experiment with me. It'll only last a minute or two, but I think it'll be valuable, and you'll be able to take this with you for the rest of your life. So close your eyes, relax, and think about a very dark place, a room with nothing in it, a very dark, empty space. Now think about like electrons. Think about them kind of flowing through the air, moving from place to place, free-flowing electrons going around. Now think about them going through wires. What must that look like, or what must that mean? Now think about an operating system. Think about it sort of being constructed. Think about it how it's sort of, maybe it's talking to things in some way. Maybe you don't know what the code means. That's not really important. Don't get too bogged down in the weeds. Now think about a keyboard. When you're typing things in, keystrokes, something's happening, some electrons are doing something, something's traveling across this set of circuits or whatever. Now think about video cards, video drivers. What do those things mean? What is that? How does that fit into this picture that you're coming up with? Now what about RAM? What is RAM? What does that mean to you? What do you think it means? What about I/O? What is a bus? What is a CPU? Think about how that fits into this architecture. What is that thing? How does it fit? Now think about a network. What does a network mean? How are these things connected to one another? What about threading? What does threading mean in this model that you just came up with? How do you do threading in this thing? How do electrons move differently in this scenario? What about TCP? You're making outbound calls to the internet. There's this thing called TCP. Maybe you don't even really know what that means. Maybe you don't know the acronym. It's not relevant. Just imagine what it must be. Imagine what it must think. What must be going on here? IP. What's IP? Do you know what that is? It doesn't really matter. Just think there must be something called IP. There must be something called TCP. Just imagine what that must be going across the network. Now you have packets. Packets contain data. You don't really know what they look like necessarily. Maybe they do different things. They have different sizes. Switching. What's switching? Do you know what the switch is? I mean, you probably have one in your house, but do you know what it's actually doing under the hood? Think about how that fits in this diagram that you're coming up with. What about routing? BGP. Do you know what BGP is? Do you know how it works? Maybe not. Maybe you don't work in that field. Imagine there must be something called BGP. Imagine it must have something to do with routing, whatever that is. What about DNS? Going across the wire, making us aware of where things are on the network, giving us IP addresses. Do you know how that works? Do you know how A through N works? It's not really relevant. Just keep thinking about what that must look like. Now, photons traveling over long-haul fiber, for instance. What must that look like? How is it being transferred from electrons to photons? What's that sort of switching infrastructure look like? Now you're talking about HTTP requests, probably closer to your wheelhouse. If you've never seen HTTP, just imagine what it must look like. You have an HTTP request, an HTTP response. What about browser caching? How does that work? CSS, JavaScript, Java, Flash, plugins. All of these things change what's going on, how it's being rendered. What about the database lookups being done on the remote machine? You know how that works? You know how that hooks into this whole model. What about rendering? Do you know how rendering works on your browser? Do you know how it works in the operating systems? What about blitting? Do you know how stuff works? Maybe you don't even know what that, you've never even heard that word before. But there's something called blitting. So imagine what blitting must be in context of your operating system. Now think about bad actors. Think about man-in-the-middle attacks. How would a man-in-the-middle get in this scenario? Where would you put him? On all the places you just came up with in your mind, where would you put that bad actor in all those different places? Stealing data through maybe things like DNS cache poisoning or something. DNS rebinding, cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, malware, command injection. These are all different attacks. All of these things could be used to leverage something about this infrastructure that you just designed in your brain. Now open your eyes. All right, you with me? No one fell asleep? Or late, it's not too much? So the point of that exercise is there's probably several things in what you just designed in your brain that you're a little fuzzy on, I would hope. Does anyone feel like there might be a couple spots that maybe not super clear on what those things are? Yeah, I mean, me too, right? There's parts of that I'm not 100% comfortable with. But that is a blind spot. That is an area where it's difficult to talk to somebody who works in that space. If we don't kind of close that gap and figure out what those things actually are, that's a problem. Now, what you just came up with in your mind is the most accurate model in the world that you have ever seen of all of those things, because you came up with it. Now, it's not necessarily right, it's not necessarily complete, but getting from where you were a few seconds ago to where the actual reality is, that's the learning process. That's where you go from ignorant to a specialist, to somebody who's going to be able to stand in front of a keynote and tell thousands of people what's going on, right? Not that I know what's going on, but you know what I'm talking about. So just a couple of quick questions. I mean, how many of you do home network segmenting? Okay, about maybe 10, 15%. How many of you put your firewall on an admin network, completely separated? Okay, 3, 4 of you? Okay. How many people use something substantially more secure than a default Linux like Ubuntu or Red Hat or something for their web servers? 5, 6, all right. How many people harden the kernel above sort of the normal stuff that you have to getting rid of, unintended binaries, services, stuff? About 5 of you guys. How many of you guys log off of host? So don't do your logging on host. You push it off to a forensically secured environment that's isolated. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of you? And how many people do logging substantially beyond what the default, like IIS or Apache, does? A little bit more, 7 or 8. So these are areas that basically cost almost nothing. usually this is not a very expensive thing that I put on there. But this is the fact that I would say less than 15% of you do the sum total of all of this stuff is scary. We should be doing all of these things. These are pretty simple things. This is just a forensics exercise for the most part, but it actually aids in security in so many ways, it's almost hard to articulate it. But if you don't start down the path of looking at these things, and these things are not traditional webappsec. This is more like sysadmin stuff. But if we don't talk to sysadmins, we're not going to get the benefit that our websites need. We're not going to get the security that they need. So I'll give you a concrete example of where this particular blind spot affects us in our webappsec world. So there's this thing called strict transport security. Have you guys all heard of this? Okay, one or two of you guys. So basically, it allows. Okay, you have two websites. One is HTTP. The other one's HTTP. If you link from one to the other, your browser makes a request. You're going to send the referring URL. You have another set of websites. One is HTTPS. The other one's HTTPS. You link to them. Your referring URL is sent. If you go from HTTPS to HTTP, though, no referring URL. You know what I'm saying? So strict transport security, once upon a time, was designed by, more or less by PayPal, to say that I always want to pin my browser rather, so it only goes to HTTPS. So if someone tries to downgrade me using SSL strip or middler or something, I'm always going to the HTTPS site. So that seems all well and good. It stops a lot of types, different types of man-in-the-middle attacks or whatever. The problem is that's really a very narrow way of thinking of the problem. That's only thinking about the attack that I'm trying to solve and the defense for an attack. It's not thinking about the ecosystem of all the things on the internet, all the bad things that can happen. So the very first second I heard about it, literally, someone told me at a conference, and I'm like, well, one immediate thing I know I can do off the top of my head is use it for tracking. Every bit of entropy is one step closer to de-anonymization. It turns out you need about 30 bits of entropy for the entire internet. So I put up 30 different web servers. They either have STS turn on or off or whatever, and I can pin it over the duration of the lifetime of however long I feel like making it, because it cannot be downgraded. So it effectively is a tracking pixel that lasts for as long as I feel like making it last. So the Google guys went back and they fixed that, fixed it in some bizarre way that actually makes STS not very effective. But then I started thinking it's also not so great for privacy. In the previous example I was talking about, where if you're linking from HTTPS to HTTP, that's actually a very dangerous example of where STS can be used against you. So let's take a bank, for instance. A bank is on an internal network or whatever, or it's external or whatever, it doesn't really matter. But they're linking to things that they don't necessarily trust in the same way you might be expecting. Maybe some kind of semi-shady mortgage lender or something. But they're linking from HTTPS to HTTP, so they're getting rid of all the nonces and stuff that might be in the URL, anything that might be dangerous, any privacy-related information or whatever. So the problem is, over time, if that person clicks on that link multiple times, I can set STS to push them up to HTTPS land. So the browser is now talking HTTPS to HTTPS instead of HTTPS to HTTP. And now referring URLs are sent, now I get the nonce. See the problem? So when you're looking at any design choices like that, that's a very simple example of a couple of very large oversights in a single protocol, a single change to the browser. This is the kind of thing that I want you to get in front of. I want you guys, minions in our hacker army here. You know what I mean? Go find these things. There are so many edge cases that people aren't really thinking about, and these are where the really serious vulnerabilities lie in wait and only strike that sometime far down the road when some major shady service provider starts going to STS and starts getting all this really dangerous information. So there's second blind spot is a little different. One thing, I did a couple presentations on this, and I think it didn't really resonate throughout the industry as much as it really should have. Operational and travel security are really, really important for our industry. We have to protect ourselves first. If we can't protect ourselves first, we're never going to protect anybody else. So if you're traveling with your laptop, I got some harsh words for you. So once upon a time, when I started in this industry, it was a game. It was a fun game. It was just a bunch of kind of miscreant hackers breaking into modems and stuff. And I used to tell the story of me climbing telephone poles and clipping into making free phone calls. Of course, I had no one to call, so that's the only reason I never went to jail. But things have changed in two completely different ways. One is it has become a militarized internet. Once upon a time, we were possibly worried about going to jail, but we were not worried about the military infiltrating our internet. That was not really the sort of the core of what we were thinking about as far as a determined adversary. And now, more or less, every country who has a cyber army or whatever is on the internet and using it to their advantage. But the second way is that we as an industry are starting to weaponize it ourselves. Bad guys are really coming out. So I think that if you think about your travel security as being sort of like, well, I always make sure to tell people I'm out of office so they know not to do bad things in my behalf when I'm out of office or something. That's really not the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to it. I don't really care if you can't tweet. I don't care if you can't Facebook, if you can't Google Plus while you're traveling. I mean, I know that seems like kind of a big deal in the 10 minutes that you don't get to do that while you're traveling or whatever. But it really isn't a big deal. And we as professionals need to treat this as a professional organization. We cannot treat our security as if it's something as simple as all I have to do is close my laptop and I'm secure. That's just not how it works. Determined adversaries have gone along a lot further. If you really want to know the details, come and talk to me and I'll tell you about all these kind of terrible things that have happened in travel over the years. But we are now playing a very different game than we used to be playing. And we have to treat this as a type of game that we can lose very easily instead of a game that we are more likely to win than lose. And that comes heavily with operational security and travel security. So the next one is adversaries. This is one that I spend a lot of personal time on. The company doesn't necessarily pay me to go do this, but I find a lot of value in doing it. I spend a lot of time talking with bad guys. Here's another exercise for you. So this is, I'm sure you've all seen this before, I hope so. It's sort of an introductory psychological thing that they have in tons of textbooks. But this is two different pictures at once. One is a beautiful young woman and one is an old witch kind of woman. And most people can see both. Maybe it takes a little thinking before you get to see both. Can all of you see both? Yeah? Okay. So the CIA uses this as a good demonstration exercise. They say that it's not a matter of seeing both, it's how fast you can see both, and then switch back and forth. If you can very rapidly switch between the two in your brain, and you can see both like as fast as I'm moving my fingers kind of, then you're much more likely to be able to tell what an adversary is doing in context of whatever you're saying. You're able to see both sides of the fence. If you can't see the other side of the fence, you're not going to be very effective as an operational security person, right? You need to be able to know what's happening on the bad side as well as the good side. So your ability, your mental flexibility is very important in this industry. I think it's very important to know your adversary. I don't mean know in the biblical sense, and I don't mean know as in textbook sense. I mean talk to them, right? I mean actually interact with them on a personal level. Believe it or not, they're all humans. They actually are, I know you think that they're mostly robots just because that's what you see in their logs, but there's somebody behind all of this. And they're usually very interesting people, very smart, very ambitious, usually have some troubled past. Sometimes there's sociopaths, but they're very interesting people. More importantly, they do have feelings, and they really very often need somebody to talk to. And ironically, it turns out security people are some of the best people for them to talk to. They know that they're telling you things that they shouldn't be telling you, but yet they do it anyway. So possibly they don't give away their own special sauce or whatever, but they will tell you about people they want busted, problems in the industry, things that worry them, technologies that are working that aren't working. That's all very useful information for us to make informed decisions about what we're going to do in the future. They have interesting motives, too. Sometimes it's just not as clear as I think people think it is. It's like, oh, it's a profit motive. Well, yeah, but why are they getting a lot of money? Like, what's the purpose of getting a lot of money? Money is, for money's sake, is not really very interesting. Usually there's something else going on that's driving them towards that. I don't think that every adversary on Earth is willing to talk. I think there's some who are very good about their own operational security and don't say a word. Kudos to them. But I think that there are a lot that do want to talk, and it's just a matter of finding them. And I think one of the problems in our industry is we're not willing, as an industry, to go find and talk to them. We're willing to find them to bust them, but we're not willing to stop and talk to them and hear what's going on. I tell every bad guy that I talk to, I'm not going to try to put you in jail. I might go after your tactics, try to fix what's wrong with our industry, but I'm not going to try to put you in jail personally. It's just it breaks my my intelligence chain. It's stupid. It's very similar to the way that we block on firewalls by IP address. It's a very bad idea. It basically tells the attacker exactly what not to do. It tells them how they're caught, breaks the fourth wall. It's a very dangerous idea. You should not do it. So if you need somebody to approve it, right? A lot of people feel like, oh, I'm not allowed to go do that. You are allowed to go do that. Just tell them that RSnake sent you. The internet sent you, right? You can go ahead and blame me, but only just for this. Don't blame me for anything else. Anything you do beyond talking to them is your own thing. But I think a lot of people are concerned about their personal safety when they're doing this kind of thing. But I want to assure you that it's worth it for the industry. Sometimes you have to be a little self-sacrificial just to do something that's better for all of us. The next one is Tart Fixation. This is actually one of the more annoying things to me personally in the industry. I don't think that all vulns are created equal. So give me a very simple example is 2 cross-site scripting exploits. One is on one website, one is on another website. Are those 2 things the same severity? Who knows, right? I mean, it totally depends. What are we talking about? Is one a nuclear facility and the other one's a blog? I mean, what are we talking about? So it really depends. You have to know a lot more about what's going on, and you can't be hyper-focused on one particular flaw that you are working on. I know that it's really easy to get interested in something you're working on, and I certainly would not discourage you, not intentionally discouraging you from being interested in something that perhaps other people aren't, because that leads to all kinds of discoveries, and it's self-fulfilling in all kinds of interesting ways. But there are some serious problems with it. So every couple of years, about every 2 years or so, I bring on a protege, and I teach them. Usually it's about 6 months or so, and then they go off and do whatever they're going to do. I don't publish who they are or whatever. But what I've noticed with my proteges in all the cases, almost near 100% of them cannot accurately do a dread severity rating for a vulnerability. At least not off the cuff. They can do it on paper. If you sit them down and you actually make them draw it out on paper, they can get pretty close to the right answer. They're still a little rusty, but they can manage it. But in their head, they absolutely cannot do it. So I would challenge you, if you see a bunch of vulnerabilities, a stack of vulnerabilities coming in from a scanner or whatever, don't rely on the scanner's prioritization. Just take the vulnerability and do your own dread severity on it and see what you think. Do a mental version first. See what your gut tells you. Is this actually a high when it says it's a high or whatever? Just say, I think I agree or it's not or whatever. And then do it on paper. And really think about what the actual damage potential, reproducibility, impact, all these things are about that particular vulnerability. And I think you will find in a large amount of cases, your gut is not correct. The dread impact is actually very different in many cases than your gut will probably tell you. And that's a problem for our industry. We often say, this is a terrible vuln, and then we go back and do an analysis of it, and we're like, well, it's kind of, no one would ever care about this vuln. It'll never be used. Yes, theoretically, in some bizarro world, this could be bad, but it's not. So I don't want to say that your baby isn't special, but your baby isn't very special. You know what I mean? There's a lot of very similar vulnerabilities out there to almost everything we've ever done. And I don't want you to get hyper-focused on that one particular thing because you came up with it. I know a lot of researchers, security penetration testers, they're like so excited because they found one thing. And I'm like, yes, that's a good job. But it's a kind of a low severity. And they're like, no, it's a high severity. I'm like, nope, it's not a high severity. When you actually do the analysis, it very often ends up being significantly less impactful than I think people want it to be. Ultimately, I want you to focus a little bit more on the ecosystem as well. So I did some analysis a couple weeks back. I sat down for a weekend, and actually most of the weekend was spent installing stuff. But I decided I was going to take just a handful of open source CMSs that I found off the shelf, install them, and just start hacking on all of them, just to sort of see what I find. So I found 7 ODays, which I have not published. that are all, I would say medium to high severity. And so I decided, well, I'm going to see what happens on this vulnerability broker markets. I'm going to see how this all works. From personal experience, I had never messed with them, so I should try, right? It's a blind spot. I don't know how that industry works, or that part of the industry works. So I went and actually attempted to sell all of my vulns to see what happened. And it turns out that every single one of them got kicked back wholesale. They didn't want a single one of them. And I asked them, like, why would this be kicked back? I mean, some of these, you go to a web page, I get a shell on your box. I mean, it's really just that bad. Very, very simple, cross-site request forgery leading to command injection on your box. And they said, well, the problem is we don't have a buyer for it. The buyers for our stuff, if you saw the keynote yesterday, the buyers for our stuff tend to be buying stuff that's in C source code. They tend to be buying things that exploits in bind, for instance. An exploit in bind might go for $100,000. Maybe it gives you a user-level access on a box, $100,000. The exact same level access to the exact same box, if it comes through an exploit that's web-based, for instance, is worth $0 on that same market. Zero. So $100,000, zero, exact same access. So I talked with my black hat friends. I'm like, okay, what would this same vuln go for on the underground? Like, what would that cost? How much money I would be able to make on your underground markets? And they said, well, a link to us on a single web page, depending on the web page, so there's some caveats there, is worth about $500. So if you can get it on 20,000 web pages, that's worth about $1 million to us. So the disparity between $0 and $1 million is a blind spot. We're definitely missing out on a lot of very, very serious vulns that the black hats do care about. I don't care if there's no buyer for it. The black hats care about it. They will buy it. And that basically pushes security researchers to do bad things because we don't have a good place to put those vulns. That worries me a lot. So I think part of this comes down to people just not knowing what they have. They really don't understand even what's in their own environment. They don't understand what's important to them. They don't realize that box that I can get a shell on also has access to all kinds of other crazy things because when I hack it, I hack all these other things. So, simple things like go download Fierce. It's a tool I wrote a long time ago. Run it across all your site, all your domains. It does DNS enumeration. It'll get all of your potential subdomains that I can find. Then you can do things like Bing IP search, find all kinds of other unrelated subdomains on shared hosting. You can use Nmap, Masscan, Unicorn Scan, or whatever to find the actual ports that are open. And you should actually look at that stuff and figure out, is this okay that it's sitting out there? Because I guarantee you, if you can find it using these tools, a bad guy can find it using these tools. I think this comes down to things like GRC, which I'm not a huge fan of, but I think understanding what you have and the value of your assets is very, very important. If you aren't supplying some sort of GRC tool, whether it's an actual wholesale GRC tool or even an Excel spreadsheet, for God's sakes, whatever, right? It doesn't matter. If you're not cataloging all your assets and defining what the value of those things are to you, you're probably not spending in the right place. But this does not give you a free pass to be antagonistic or rude to other people. Just because you know better and what vulns are worth more or what vulns are higher priority or whatever, that doesn't mean you get to go be an ass, right? We all got to play along. We all make mistakes. We all have to learn. This is, I'm sure, one that you are a little bit more familiar with, but I have some particular comments on. I think one of the bigger blind spots I see in this industry is compliance versus security. I see so many people talking about compliance as if it is security. Those two things are really not actually very closely related in many ways. Sometimes compliance can drive good security practice, but that's kind of a step away. So let me give you one anecdote that I personally love. So I was working for this one client when I used to be an independent consultant, and I gave them a vuln. It's a legitimate vuln. This actually can be used against you. I would consider it a kind of medium level type vuln, not super bad and not particularly likely, but semi-bad. And instead of sort of acknowledging the fact that this vuln existed and saying, okay, well, we don't agree with whatever reason you came up with and why we should fix it, and just say, look, we'll put it aside or whatever. We'll log it, but we're not going to do anything about it, which would have been fairly reasonable. I would not have complained. Instead, they just wholesale ignored me. And the reason they did that is because this particular vuln would put them out of compliance. And if they fail compliance, that could be worth millions of dollars to them. Ignoring me costs them nothing. So this is called willful negligence. When you go to court, this is going to be a very hard thing to stand behind. You really should have some sort of carve-out to allow yourself to have vulns when you know that they're a vuln that you don't want to fix. It's a much more reasonable way to think about a vuln that maybe your whole business is relying on having this vuln, for instance. That's fine, but you should at least make note of it, copy it down. I think part of the problem, from my perspective, is compliance forces you to spend in areas that don't actually help your own security. There's a ton of research on why. I'm not trying to pick on antivirus in particular, but since you've heard it before, antivirus, but there's other similar software out there. IDSs, for instance, I'm not a particularly huge fan of. They're a job creator. Unless you've gotten everything else right, they don't really make sense. But I think compliance forces you to put your dollars in places that are not most effective for your security. If you haven't done a good threat model, a really good one, and analyze actually what your vulns are, you're probably spending in the wrong place. It's just simple, right? If you're putting money in one place and you're like, I hope that's the right place, you're probably spending in the wrong place. I did some work on some very large banking infrastructure for a while. And one thing that I noticed was BITS was probably one of the more comprehensive self-assessment things, or SIG, was one of the more comprehensive documents I've ever read about security. It goes everything, fire escapes all the way through, the entire stack of everything you'd have to worry about, all the CSSP stuff through the OWASP top 10. The problem is bad guys really do not care about the OWASP top 10. They don't. They do not care at all about it. They only care about how they can break into websites. So from my perspective, being one that would like to catalog every vuln, maybe it doesn't matter that the vuln is there, maybe it's low severity, but I like to have at least a list of everything and know what those risks are. I approached them and I said, I would like to help you evolve bits and add a whole bunch of stuff. There's a whole bunch of things I have on there. And they came back to me and said, well, because you're not a bank, you're not a financial institution, we can't take your advice. That is so unbelievably dangerous. I cannot tell you. So this is where compliance does not meet security at all. And the other problem is hackers evolve very, very rapidly. There's some vulns that they've managed to hang on to just because they're super easy. One of the things that I thought was interesting is that Sql Injection is still their favorite, even though command injection technically gives them more. The reason is because Sql Injection is easier. That is something that, sure, compliance will help you with because they say we're covering all the most common vulns. But there's a lot of uncommon vulns out there that bad guys also use. So the last blind spot I'm going to talk about is the consumer. And this one's kind of near and dear to me. I spent a lot of time talking to them. So this is kind of a normal website out there. Has a whole bunch of embedded content in it. This tool is called Request Policy in Firefox. And I think the average person doesn't really realize that the average website today is a very three-dimensional thing. It's not a two-dimensional, flat thing like you're visualizing. It's a very three-dimensional. There's all kinds of things going on. There is a z-axis. Things can live above or below things. And because consumers can't see that, we can't really articulate to them like there could be something invisibly happening here. That doesn't really resonate with people. It's FUD, really. It sounds like FUD. It's not really FUD because there is stuff that they can't see happening, but it doesn't really help consumers. Giving them weird advice like, oh, you should copy a link down or whatever, and that will save you. That's not really very good advice. If you're relying on them to make their own security decisions, you've already sort of lost the battle. They don't get the complexity of the internet in so many different ways. That exercise I had where you all closed your eyes? They are 10 times worse than you were in that exercise, I guarantee you, on the best day. They don't even know those words at all ever existed. They just think their browser is the internet for the most part, or their mail is the internet. They actually think that is it. That there is. I've actually talked to people who think it's in their computer, that this thing contains the internet. I'm carrying the internet around with me. You know what I mean? They don't really understand the principles of what's going on. I met one guy who actually thought the internet was a town in Northern California. He actually had no idea. It was a friend of mine's dad. So I think that we need to spend more time talking to actual human beings. We spend a lot of time in the echo chamber talking to each other, and that's it's fine for evolving ideas and solving blind spots, but it's terrible for understanding what consumers are capable of understanding. I spend a lot of time talking to cab drivers, bartenders, and waitresses because these people are paid to be nice to me. And so if I start asking them questions like, well, what do you think about PayPal security? You know what I mean? They'll be like, oh, it's bad. I got a phishing email. It's like, okay, that's what they think about PayPal security, phishing, right? That's the whole mental model about everything related to PayPal security, which is great because that sort of helps you make design decisions. You can say, what if I did this? Like I'll ask people, like, second factor authentication. I was like, what if I told you this didn't actually make you more safe? Would you still like it? Like, yeah. I'm like, okay, that's interesting, right? That's useful information, There's a trust indicator versus security. Those things are different in consumers' minds. They also don't understand the security risks of any one particular action of what they're doing. And we have these really terrible things we tell them to go do. Like my favorite is cut and paste links out of email. It's like, what is that? How is that helping anything? You know what I mean? Like if you think about it, really. I mean, they don't know what a URL is. I actually have run into multiple people that don't even know that the URL bar is something you can type in. They think it's static and it just changes on its own, and they didn't even know you could change and type in something. So even that very simple indicator that it's a white box and you can probably touch it and do something with it. I ran into one security person who actually asked me, why can't you make it so people can't change that? So this is the level that we're at, right? These are the types of people we have to interact with, and that's okay. And I don't want to say that those people are bad people or stupid or whatever, but they definitely are not capable of making informed decisions. We have not armed them with the right information. And I will conjecture that we cannot arm them with the correct information. It is impossible given the magnitude of the problem. Therefore, the only answer is to give them something like opt-out security. They start with good security, and then they have to do work to get out of that secure infrastructure. Thank you. There's no more thing as optional security in the other direction. Right? You cannot opt into security, opt out. So ultimately, I think one problem that we as a security industry face is we are not actually pro-consumer. We've spent a lot of time being pro-business. We spend a lot of time protecting corporations, but we don't spend a lot of time protecting consumers. And the problem is, unlike pretty much any time in human history, everything we do is now tracked and logged by the exact same systems that we use to track and log bad guys. And if we err on the side of corporations instead of the side of consumers, that information might start haunting us in the not too distant future. I highly recommend that if you sort of siding against consumers, taking their privacy away from them, that you seriously reconsider that in the not too distant future. Not saying you can't change sides eventually, but if there ever were a sort of a forthcoming war against consumers and they're taking their privacy back, you will be on the losing side of that battle, trust me. Legislation will either win or the groundswell of the consumers themselves. I really, really stress this. If you're on Twitter and you're telling me that advertisers should be able to do whatever they want, and the fact that you're an advertiser and you're showing single hot ladies to my child or whatever, and you're telling me that legitimately you just need more tracking data so that you know that that's a child, you're not going to win that fight. You're going to lose it. And that's going to be on your record for a very, very long time. It's hard to remove that stuff. So I said all this to say something a little bit different, right? There are 6 blind spots. I think you could tackle any one of these very easily. I mean, none of these are particularly difficult. If you tackle even one of them as a general average across this room, you've made yourself approximately 16, 17% better. I think that's a really easy thing to do. I think it's easy to challenge yourself to be just a little bit more conscientious about what's going on in the industry. Open your eyes a little bit. These are the 6 blind spots. My time is up here, but I would like you to talk to the person next to you and pick one. Commit to it. If you don't commit to it, you'll never do it. You'll walk out of this room, you'll forget this thing ever happened. Think about it. Think about which one resonates with you. Do it, and then we'll be a little bit less blind. Thank you.